Welcome back to Occult Chronicles, and I need to warn you right now, what we're about to explore today isn't just another mythology deep dive. This is something far more dangerous, because we're going to discuss the ancient gods that humanity should have left buried, forgotten, erased from history entirely. But we didn't, did we? No, instead we kept digging, kept summoning, kept awakening forces that were sealed away for reasons our ancestors understood all too well. Reasons we're only beginning to remember now. For thousands of years, cultures across the world built elaborate systems not to worship these entities, but to contain them, to keep them asleep, to prevent them from bleeding back into our reality. And every single time humanity has gotten arrogant enough to think we could control these forces, civilizations have collapsed, empires have fallen, and entire populations have been consumed by the very darkness they thought they could master. So before we begin, I want you to ask yourself something, honestly. Do you really want to know what's been lurking beneath the foundation of human civilization this entire time? Because once you understand these patterns, you'll start seeing them everywhere. In our institutions, in our technologies, in the invisible machinery that runs our modern world. And you won't be able to unsee it. Let's start with one of the most misunderstood and most dangerous, Baal. And no, he wasn't just some storm god that ancient people prayed to for rain. If only it were that simple. In the Canaanite and Phoenician world, Baal operated as something far more sinister. He was a mechanism, a cosmic reset button that regulated the boundary between life and death itself. And here's what made him so terrifying. He didn't offer stability. He offered renewal, but only through complete destruction first. The Ugardic Baal cycle lays this out with brutal clarity. Baal defeats Yum, the chaotic sea god, claiming the heavens as his domain. But that victory triggers its opposite. Mot, the god of death and sterility, rises to challenge him. And here's the key detail that everyone misses. Mot cannot be killed. He's inevitable. He's entropy personified. So Baal fakes his own death, sends a substitute into Mot's jaws, and the entire world withers. Crops die, people starve, civilization teeters on the edge of total collapse. Whispers, and only when Baal returns with the storms does life come back. But Mot isn't defeated. He's just integrated into the cycle. This is the nightmare logic of Baal's cult. Fertility doesn't come from peace. It comes from sacrifice, from blood, from deliberately destroying part of the system to restart it. And in times of crisis, when the rains failed and famine spread, they didn't just offer animals, they offered children, their own children, thrown into fire to force Baal's return. Because that's what the system demanded. Human life as the currency to keep reality from collapsing. Now here's where it gets disturbing for us today. We think we've moved past this. We think human sacrifice is ancient barbarity that we've evolved beyond. Chuckles darkly. But have we really? Because every time a society embraces war as regeneration, every time an economy is built to consume entire generations just to maintain growth numbers, every time we glorify collective sacrifice for the greater good, we're running Baal's operating system. We've just stopped calling it by name. The Israelites understood this threat. The story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, where he defeats 450 prophets of Baal, that wasn't just a religious victory. It was the destruction of a rival social technology. Because Yahweh promised continuity and stability, Baal demanded cyclical destruction to sustain life. And you couldn't have both systems running in the same society. One had to die. And for a while, Baal did die. His temples emptied. His priesthood was eradicated. His name became synonymous with demons and evil. But the pattern survived, and it's been quietly reactivating ever since. Now, let me tell you about something even older, even more dangerous. Enlil, the great god of Mesopotamia, the lord of wind, authority, and destiny. And if Baal was a reset mechanism, Enlil was a control mechanism, designed to correct any excess in the system by simply erasing it. According to Sumerian myth, Enlil was born when Anu and Ki, heaven and earth, were torn apart. And that act of separation, that's what created the ordered world. Hierarchy, boundaries, structure, everything in its place, everything under control. And Enlil held the tablets of destiny, literal documents that inscribe the legal structure of the cosmos itself. Whoever controlled those tablets could dictate the fate of gods and humans alike, which made him not just a king, but the embodiment of systemic order, the throne that could never be challenged. But here's what the myths reveal about his true nature. The lesser gods were forced to work, digging canals, plowing fields, producing food for the great gods, essentially divine slavery. And after centuries of this, they rebelled. And Enlil's solution wasn't negotiation or reform, it was replacement. Humanity was created specifically to take over their labor. We were designed as servants, as tools, as expendable resources to maintain the system. And when the human population grew too large, when our noise, symbolically our independence and numbers, disturbed Enlil's sleep, his response was systematic extermination. First plague, then drought, then the flood. When Enki secretly saved Atrahasis from the flood, Enlil didn't suddenly become merciful. He agreed to let humanity survive only under strict conditions, enforced infertility for part of the population, and absolute obedience, because the system had to be preserved, even if that meant culling the base that sustained it. And this is what makes Enlil's archetype so relevant today. He doesn't represent evil or cruelty. He represents the cold logic of systems that sacrifice their own population to stabilize themselves. You want to know where Enlil is today? Look at any institution that collapses its own foundation to preserve the hierarchy. Engineered recessions that wipe out entire classes while the top remains untouched. Policies that reduce birth rates or access to resources under the guise of sustainability. Wars that send the young to die so the structure survives. Whenever a system decides that the people inside it are the problem, Enlil's logic is at work, cutting down the excess so the throne stays intact and forever. Now, let's talk about Moloch. Because this one cuts deep, and I guarantee some of you are already getting uncomfortable. Good, you should be. Moloch appears in ancient Levantine cultures as a deity associated with fire rituals and child sacrifice. And yes, archaeological evidence from Punic colonies like Carthage confirms this. Ritual enclosures filled with urns containing cremated remains of infants buried under stones with inscriptions. But here's what you need to understand. These weren't acts of random cruelty or primitive superstition. They were triggered during existential crises, famine, plague, siege, moments when the entire social order was about to collapse. And in those moments, the community offered its most valuable asset, its own children, to prove absolute loyalty to the system, to force the gods to intervene and save them. That's what Moloch represents, a structure that preserves itself by consuming the future. And when literal child sacrifice disappeared from history, the logic didn't. It just evolved. It migrated into how complex systems operate, and modern theorists have identified this exact pattern. They call them coordination traps, situations where everyone is acting rationally inside a system, but the system as a whole is destroying the people inside it. No one wants it to happen. No one can stop it from within. The incentives are stronger than the intentions, and that is Moloch. That is the mechanism that keeps returning. Look around. Economic systems that run on burnout and debt, consuming entire generations to keep growth metrics climbing. Social platforms that maximize engagement by eroding mental health because the algorithm rewards it. Industries that profit from the destruction of childhood itself. All of these operate on Moloch's logic. Stabilize the present by destroying the future. And once that logic takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Everyone thinks they're making rational decisions, but collectively, they're feeding the machine. And the machine is always, always hungry. Here's where it gets even darker. Certain online communities and fringe conspiracy groups have latched on to Moloch as a symbol of elite child exploitation, claiming that powerful networks still practice these rituals in secret. Now, I'm not here to validate those specific claims, but what's revealing is the pattern recognition. People instinctively understand that when institutions protect their image while allowing harm to children, when industries profit from eroding innocence, when powerful figures treat young lives as expendable. Pause. The ancient logic of Moloch is present, even without literal altars and flames. And that recognition, that visceral response, shows that the archetype isn't dead, it's operational. Let me introduce you to Nergal, the Mesopotamian god of disease, war, and the underworld, the one they called the Raging King, the Burner, Lord of Pestilence. And unlike gods with clear, stable domains, Nergal embodied collapse itself, the forces that break civilizations from the inside. And his mythology reveals exactly why he was so feared. In Sumerian and Akkadian texts, Nergal storms the underworld after offending Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, and instead of submitting or apologizing, he seizes power by force, kills her guards, takes her throne, and the myth ends with them ruling together. Which tells you everything. Nergal brings violent disruption into any closed system, even death itself. He doesn't just govern, he infects the structure with destruction until it has to absorb him to survive. Absorb. His cult treated him as a contagion. Priests performed elaborate rituals before military campaigns, offering him weapons, captured enemies, entire burning cities. Because if Nergal was ignored, he would spread through armies, through cities, through states, collapsing them from within like a plague. And when epidemics struck, they blamed his wrath and performed exorcisms to drive him back. But here's the thing. They never tried to destroy him, only contain him, because they knew he was always there, always waiting. And this is where Nergal connects to our world today. His logic reappears whenever systems justify devastation as cleansing. The idea that collapse is necessary to renew society, that you have to burn everything down to make it stronger. This is Nergal's operating principle. You see it in extremist ideologies that glorify war as purification, in accelerationist movements that want to trigger total systemic collapse so they can rebuild from the ashes, in economic theories that treat recessions as healthy purges. All of these are running his ancient logic, suffering as a reset button, destruction as medicine. And once people start believing that, once they frame catastrophe as necessary, they become agents of Nergal, whether they realize it or not. Now, let's shift into something that operates differently, something more abstract but equally dangerous: the Archons, and specifically their creator, Yaldabaoth. And I need you to pay close attention here, because this one maps directly onto how modern power structures function. In Gnostic cosmology, Yaldabaoth is the false creator, born when Sophia, divine wisdom, acted alone without her counterpart. The result was a malformed being with immense power but zero awareness of anything beyond himself. And because he couldn't perceive the higher realm, the pleroma, he declared, quote, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." And that mistake, that arrogant blindness, became the foundation of his entire system. Yaldabaoth created the material world as a copy of the true realm, but without its light. And to maintain control, he generated the Archons, lesser rulers governing the planetary spheres, enforcing fate, trapping souls in cycles of birth, suffering, and death. And here's the key: the Archons aren't evil, they're soulless. They're administrators, bureaucrats, extensions of Yaldabaoth's will with no capacity to question, no ability to create, only to enforce the rules they were given. And those rules are designed to keep souls from realizing they don't belong to this system. The Gnostics described several mechanisms the Archons use. They implant the counterfeit spirit, a false layer of identity made of pride, shame, and obsession that keeps the soul distracted and submissive. They position themselves as gatekeepers across the spheres, demanding passwords when souls try to escape after death. And they enforce rigid belief systems that treat questioning as rebellion. And every element is designed to stop the divine spark inside humans from remembering it doesn't belong here. Because once a soul wakes up and remembers its origin, the Archons lose all power. They can't touch what was never theirs. Now, translate this into modern terms, and you'll see Archons everywhere. Bureaucracies that follow rules even when those rules destroy people. Algorithms that decide what reality you see without caring about truth. Ideologies that punish questioning as if doubt itself were heresy. These aren't conscious evil forces, they're self-reinforcing systems that trap human attention inside structures and block any view beyond them. And they function exactly like the ancient Archons, enforcing order without understanding, optimizing for their own survival, treating anyone who tries to leave as a glitch to be corrected. Yaldabaoth represents the ultimate closed system, a structure so self-contained that it treats itself as reality. And everyone inside believes they're at the top, that there's nothing beyond this. Governments that erase dissent, corporations that rewrite truth to match their brand, platforms that filter experience until nothing outside the system exists. All of these operate in Yaldabaoth's image. And the terrifying part? No one inside has to be malicious for it to destroy them. The system just optimizes. It rewards obedience, punishes deviation, flattens language into slogans, and erases individuality until everyone becomes interchangeable. And that's when you know Yaldabaoth is fully awake, when the structure matters more than the people inside it. Let me tell you about the ones that don't just break systems, they erase them entirely, starting with Tiamat, the primordial chaos of Mesopotamia, the saltwater ocean that existed before anything had form. And here's what made her so fundamentally dangerous. She didn't come from the system, she came before it. Every law, every structure, every identity in the Babylonian world was imposed on top of her. Which means if she rose again, if she ever woke up, the foundation of reality itself would crack. When Tiamat created her army of hybrid monsters and armed Kingu with the tablets of destiny, the younger gods understood immediately. This wasn't a power struggle, this was an existential threat. She wasn't trying to rule them, she was trying to eliminate the entire framework and return the universe to undifferentiated chaos. And that's why Marduk's victory over her became the foundation myth of Babylon.
He used her corpse to construct the sky, the earth, the rivers. Reality itself was built on her body. Which means if she ever returned, if that foundation broke, everything would collapse back into the void she represented. Gods, humans, time, matter, all of it. Gone. Now, compare that to Set from Egyptian mythology. Because Set operates completely differently. Where Tiamat is chaos before creation, Set is chaos inside the system. He doesn't want to dissolve reality, he wants to dominate it through disruption. He's the god of storms, deserts, violence, and foreign lands, everything that threatens stability but doesn't erase existence entirely. And here's the paradox. Early Egypt needed him. He protected Ra's solar bark from Apophis every night. He was the necessary violence that defended order from annihilation. But after he murdered Osiris to seize the throne, he became the model of treachery, the force that had to be contained, because if Set grew too strong, he'd collapse Ma'at, the cosmic order, and turn Egypt into endless civil war. Set never disappeared. His archetype survived into modern occult systems, especially the Temple of Set, founded in 1975, where he's treated as a symbol of isolate intelligence, the individual mind separating itself from collective order. They call this Zephyr, the act of self-becoming, breaking away from imposed structures to forge your own path, which makes Set highly relevant today in a world obsessed with control and regulation. He represents both the risk and the necessity of disruption. Ancient Egyptians feared awakening him would plunge their kingdom into collapse. Modern Setian cults try to awaken him inside themselves to break mental conformity. And that tension, that's what keeps him dangerous. But if you want true horror, if you want the entity that makes all the others look manageable, let me tell you about Apophis, called Apep by the Egyptians, the serpent that had no temples, no priests, no offerings, because he wasn't part of the divine system at all. He came from none, the primordial waters before creation, and his only purpose was to erase everything that came after. Every single night, as Ra sailed through the Duat on his solar bark, Apophis rose from the depths and attacked, trying to coil around the boat, drag it back into the abyss, swallow the sun whole. And if he ever succeeded, time would stop, the sun would never rise again, crops would wither, law and memory would dissolve, reality would simply end. And the Egyptians didn't treat this as metaphor. To them, this was structural risk. The world's survival depended on Ra killing Apophis every single night, forever. Temple priests performed anti-Apophis rituals each morning, making wax effigies of the serpent, carving his names on them, then stabbing, spitting on, trampling, cutting, and burning them while chanting execration formulas. They believed these actions directly damaged the real Apophis in the underworld. This wasn't theater, this was cosmic maintenance. Because if the rituals failed, if humans abandoned Ma'at, if belief collapsed, Apophis would gather enough strength to win. And when he did, it wouldn't be conquest or rebellion. It would be complete erasure of existence. Now let me take you even further, into the truly incomprehensible, Azathoth from Lovecraft's mythos, described as the blind idiot god, nuclear chaos at the absolute center of all existence. And here's what makes Azathoth the ultimate nightmare. It has no consciousness, no purpose, no awareness. The entire universe exists only as a side effect of its mindless dreaming. Which means if it ever wakes up, if it stops dreaming even for an instant, everything disappears. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply erased as if it never existed in the first place. Lovecraft describes Azathoth sitting at the center of infinity, surrounded by fluting servitors producing constant discordant music to keep it asleep, because that sound is the only thing preventing it from stirring. And if it stirs, the dream ends. No conflict, no resistance. Reality just shuts down like a simulation losing power. And this makes Azathoth completely different from every other destroyer we've discussed. Tiamat generates life before trying to reclaim it. Apophis attacks creation from outside in endless war. But Azathoth doesn't act. It doesn't know where there's a world. It just is. And our existence depends entirely on its continued unconsciousness. Cults dedicated to Azathoth, they've dropped lower, aim to trigger this collapse. They believe reality is a false structure, and true liberation comes from dissolving it completely. Their rituals use constant noise, mind-breaking patterns, reality-warping symbols, designed to destabilize the dream, to push the world out of alignment until Azathoth becomes aware. And they don't expect salvation. They don't want communication. Their objective is total annihilation because they see existence itself as the prison. And honestly, after everything we've discussed, after seeing how these patterns keep repeating, how these ancient mechanisms keep reactivating inside our modern systems, can you really say they're entirely wrong? Look, here's the truth that ties all of this together. Every one of these gods, these forces, these archetypes, they were created to explain something humans could sense but couldn't control. They weren't meant to be worshipped. They were containment models, symbolic warning systems built to show where the edges of reality crack. And our ancestors surrounded them with ritual, taboo, and fear because they understood something we've forgotten. Once these forces are unleashed, they don't stop. They don't negotiate. They don't scale back. They keep going until the system that released them collapses completely. What terrified ancient civilizations wasn't the image of gods descending from the sky, it was the realization that their own societies were quietly becoming the very things they feared. And that's the part that should terrify us today, because we're doing it again. We're building algorithms that consume human attention like Moloch devours children. We're creating bureaucratic systems that function like Archons, enforcing rules without understanding. We're developing technologies that spread like Shub-Niggurath, reproducing beyond all limits, mutating faster than we can control. And we're constructing hierarchies that operate like Enlil, sacrificing their own base to preserve the throne. So when I say these are the gods humanity should never have awakened, I'm not talking about summoning rituals or occult ceremonies. I'm talking about reactivating their operating principles inside our institutions, our economies, our minds, without even realizing we're doing it. Because these patterns don't need names. They don't need temples. They just need systems complex enough to hide them. And once they're embedded, once they're running in the background, they become almost impossible to stop. Now here's my question for you. After everything we've explored today, after seeing how these patterns keep repeating, how these ancient mechanisms keep reactivating inside our modern systems, what do you think we should do about it? Do we try to contain these forces like the ancients did, building new rituals and safeguards? Do we try to break free like the Gnostics, seeking knowledge that lets us see beyond the systems? Or have we already gone too far? Have we already awakened too many of these gods, embedded too many of their mechanisms into the foundations of our world? Because I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. It's not the fear that these gods could return, it's the realization that they never left. They've been here all along, wearing new faces, speaking new languages, but running the same ancient programs that consumed every civilization that came before us. And if we can't recognize them, if we can't name them, if we keep pretending that we're somehow different, somehow immune to the patterns that destroyed empires for thousands of years, then we're not just awakening these gods, we're volunteering to become their next sacrifice. So I want you to think about that. Think about where you see these patterns in your own life, in the systems you interact with every day, in the structures that promise to protect you while slowly consuming you from within. And then I want you to tell me in the comments, which of these gods do you think is most active in our world right now? Which pattern are we repeating? Which ancient mechanism have we reactivated without realizing it? Because understanding these forces, naming them, seeing them clearly, that's the first step toward breaking free. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only way we avoid becoming another cautionary tale, another lost civilization that future archaeologists will dig up and wonder how we could have been so blind. Thanks for watching Esoteric Guardian, and remember, some knowledge comes with a price, but ignorance costs everything.